www.healthcmi.com, Acupuncture Continuing Education Online. Today, acupuncture found effective for the relief of insomnia and increases the effectiveness of medications as well. So we found some research and published a nice article on it, and we want to highlight this because of the style of acupuncture used. What they found was people were taking a popular insomnia medication and they were getting some results, but when they had acupuncture, it was profound. And this article entitled Acupuncture Insomnia Relief Ups Drug Outcomes was published May 10, 2021 at healthcmi.com. So if you go to healthcmi.com, click on news, you can find that article. Great results. Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index scores were higher. Whole lot of results. But what's important about this is they use scalp acupuncture to get the job done. And we'll talk about that for a little bit because there are several ways licensed acupuncturists will go about helping people with insomnia. Now, mostly in a clinical situation, the primary modes are going to be herbal medicine and acupuncture. Both of them are part of the same system, the Jing-Lo or channel theory system. That's what makes what we call Chinese medicine or even traditional medicine, which you see in, let's say, Vietnam, Japan, Korea, etc. That's what binds them together. That makes them a cohesive unit. They're using the same principles and theories that they've been using basically for 1,000 years or more, really 2,500 years, but also modern science. Now, what's happened is scalp acupuncture has been an evolving modern form, and while it's ancient, it's also new. And highlighted in this article is a newer system by Professor Ming-Ching Zhu. I had the privilege of working with him on and off for several years. And he's one of the great modern luminaries in the field of scalp acupuncture, particularly for neurologic conditions. So that is highlighted here. Even though this research used an older, more traditional form of scalp acupuncture, but there's an overlap because the head-face zone, which is an area on the scalp used for the treatment of insomnia, mental health disorders, cognitive dysfunction, many things, that zone that Professor Zhu innovated overlaps with what we call MS1 and MS2. They're special lines. One's called, well, technically the translation would be middle line of forehead and lateral line of forehead number 1. Those lines overlap with the head-face zone. So it is an evolving modern science. Now, Professor Zhu has innovated that with clinical feedback, looking at MRI materials, and a lot of other types of EEG feedback to help increase the efficacy of acupuncture over time. It's not static. It's not just ancient. It's also modern because medicine is not East or West. Medicine is not old or new. It's either effective or it's not. And that's really how Professor Ming-Ching Zhu proceeded, which is why working with him, he gets such great results. In fact, I was at Five Branches University working with the director at that time, Ken Perlman, and I was his assistant. And I said, Ken, what's going on in this room? He said, well, that's visiting Professor Ming-Ching Zhu. And we got to see people who really had paralysis in some limbs get restored movement really on the spot for some of it. And it has to do with timing, how quickly you can get this done for certain post-stroke syndromes, post-polio syndrome, many things. I said, this is fascinating. And people were taking videos and there were other doctors there observing. So I sat in the clinical theater for that, and that began a long history. In fact, when I was assistant director, I then expanded the school, invited him to be faculty, and we created the first neurologic center for him. So that was an incredible journey we took into scalp acupuncture. And his system evolved over time as well, which is highly refined right now. So it had changed over time as well. But the older scalp acupuncture systems, there are 8 major scalp acupuncture systems, acted as a template for him to work with, and then he took it to the next level. So that's a little background on scalp acupuncture. So these zones, MS1 and MS2, Ezhengshan and Epang Yishan, those, actually, they're technically lines. Those lines overlap with the Zhu head face zone. And for acupuncturists, that's basically around the area of Du 24, GV 24, governing vessel 24, that point, Shen Ting, and also bladder 3, which is lateral to that. So these are points, if you went above the bridge of the nose, above the glabella, into the hairline about a half an inch, that region, which we use. So these researchers got great result for the treatment of insomnia using that zone. Not surprising. This is a great area for really what we call calming the spirit. In fact, the zones really center here for the Zhu system and for the number one scalp system that's a little older. They really do center on Shen Ting, and the border of it is bladder 3. And so what's going on there is the traditional indications for treatment using those zones encompasses the treatment of mental health disorders and insomnia. So you can see that those scalp zones are very important, but they also are traditional to the acupuncture points themselves. And Du 24 Shen Ting is a personal favorite of mine because it's so effective for treatment of things like hay fever, allergies, things like that, sinus congestion, all of that kind of irritating stuff. But it's also very relaxing and great for sleep, and also kind of restoring cognitive function. So an incredibly important point. And Shen, that spirit word, is in the actual name Shen Ting, which is interesting, Shen. So a big favorite of mine. Now, what a lot of people aren't aware of is that Professor Zhu did innovate the Cho-Chi and Jing-Chi techniques. So contemporizing those techniques for scalp acupuncture was really a major thrust forward for Chinese medicine. And basically it's an attenuation and tonification techniques that you use on the needles, where there's a kind of a pushing motion for the tonification and a pulling motion on the needles to get the results. Now, the pulling motion, for example, dredges the channels. And what happens is, as an acupuncturist, when you're tugging on those needles, the needles aren't moving. They're transversely inserted. It's about 30-degree angle. And they are pointed posteriorly towards Bai Hui or Du 20. But what you're finding is that as you're tugging on those needles while they're inserted, they can be 3 parallel needles in that region of Shen Ting, inserted maybe a half sun, 3/4 of a sun, or they can be pointed towards each other, not overlapping like the chicken foot technique, but kind of pointing towards each other. Reminds me of the old Wilkinson Sword and Shield commercials where they had the 3 sword blades overlapping. Not quite 3 musketeers holding up 3 blades. They were slightly more parallel than that, but not quite. Anyway, so when you tug on them, you can dredge the channel. It relaxes the entire aponeurosis of the scalp. In other words, the coating over the top of the scalp relaxes. In fact, if you treat migraines with that, you can pull a migraine out, or even many kinds of headaches out, instantly by using the Cho-Chi technique, the attenuation or the sedation technique there. You can feel the scalp, the entire scalp, just relax. The headache resolves instantly. So it's wonderful to do. It also will clear the nose pretty quickly, too, for people with the stuffy nose. So we also use it for what we call wind heat or wind cold, or things that are externally contracted due to pathogens. And so absolutely fascinating point, because it's so rapid. I can see why Professor Ming-Cheng Zhu loves scalp acupuncture so much, because it just works so well, so fast. And this research on insomnia really highlights that. So again, when you're dredging the channel, when you're doing the attenuation technique on Du 24, that region in that zone, I like to literally hold 3 needles at once when I'm doing that, and then tugging, the pulling technique. You're not really moving the needle through the skin. It's just a tugging, and it's gripped. When that releases, sometimes there can be even a snapping sound if someone is that tight, and the whole scalp just relaxes. It's amazing. But more than likely, it's just going to relax the entire scalp. The patient's going to have a sense of profound relaxation at that point, and of course, headaches will resolve. Now, in the case of severe migraine headaches, they do take time, so you let them rest with the needle. The beauty of the scalp acupuncture is people can walk around. They can sit, they can stand. They're not immobilized. This is very helpful for young patients, for people with hyperactivity issues, for people who may need to use the bathroom. In fact, it is normal within scalp acupuncture to retain those needles for hours or days at times. So very interesting stuff. And I wanted to share and highlight a little bit about scalp acupuncture and its importance because of the value of this article on the treatment of insomnia. I'm Adam White, licensed acupuncturist. Thank you for listening. www.healthcmi.com